Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Hope you enjoyed that beautiful music. David Enke provides some wonderful ambience here. Welcome back to the morning session of the Global Breakthrough Energy Movement Conference 2016. Today, it is my distinct honor and pleasure to introduce to you an author by the name of Patrick Wood. He runs Technocracy News, Technocracy Rising. He's a longtime author and economist, financial analyst, constitutionalist, and researcher. So he has some fantastic information today about some of the interesting challenges we're going to be facing in the world in our lifetime. So I want you to welcome, via Skype, Patrick Wood.
Thank you, sir. Good to be here by proxy. This will be very good. Thank you for the introduction. I didn't get to hear it, but thank you for it anyway. And thank you for all listening to me today. I realize that some of you probably have never heard me before, if maybe most of you. And I realize that you may be drinking from a fire hose this morning. And I can't really apologize for that, but I just, get ready. There's a lot of information that I want to give you this morning about energy, currency, and how this is going to be played upon the world, I believe, soon. I am the author of the book that you see on the screen, Technocracy Rising. I encourage you to get a copy of that. You can do that on technocracy.news, which is my website where I talk about technocracy and present stories from around the world. And I also have put up a link here to localactivist.net. I just mentioned that in passing. That is a private, secure social network for activists that don't want to spread everything that they're doing on Facebook and Twitter, et cetera, et cetera. So having said that, let me start, and we'll just kind of go through this. I've got a full 60 minutes of material to give you today. My journey started back in the late 1970s when I partnered with a gentleman by the name of Antony Sutton, who was formerly a research fellow at the Hoover Institution at Stanford University. And together we wrote two books, Trilaterals Over Washington, Volumes 1 and 2. These books were the de facto summary of the Trilateral Commission in those days, and the books are out of print now, but there's still a few floating around. If you'd care to look for them, you could probably find them. They might be expensive, but they're out there. But that started it, and you're going to see a little bit about the Trilateral Commission this morning as we go through the material. But that's where it started, and it's almost 40 years ago. It's a long time. My studies recently in technocracy over the last few years closed the chapter on our original work, Trilaterals Over Washington. And other than to maybe just expose technocracy a little bit more, I'm not sure that I have a lot more to say about anything. I believe this is it. So let me start by saying that the dark horse of the New World Order is not communism, socialism, or fascism. It is technocracy. Now, some of you recognize this lady, Christiana Figueres. She's the executive secretary of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. That means she's the number one at the United Nations. She's stepping down in another month from her post. Somebody else will take her place. But she's been instrumental in all of the meetings at the United Nations that have surrounded climate change in the last several years. She had a press conference last year, and she said this: "This is the first time in the history of mankind that we're setting ourselves the task of intentionally, within a defined period of time, to change the economic development model that has been reigning for at least 150 years, since the Industrial Revolution. She went on to say, this is probably the most difficult task we've ever given ourselves, which is to intentionally transform the economic development model for the first time in human history. Christiana Figueres gets it, what she's doing. They say that they're going to replace capitalism and free enterprise with a system of economics, an economic model that the United Nations calls sustainable development or green economy, which in fact is warmed over technocracy from the 1930s. I'm going to prove my case. Just to kind of nail this down a little bit, when she talks about transformation, this definition means a thorough or dramatic change in form or appearance. Transformation is not just simply putting on some makeup or some lipstick. It means a complete change. Some other synonyms for transformation include mutation, conversion, metamorphosis. I like that one. That's what butterflies do when they change from a caterpillar. Transfiguration, sea change, reconstruction, morphing, all good synonyms. This is what's happening to the world today. Very few people see it in the big picture. I hope by the time we're done, you will be among those. Nevertheless, this means war. Capitalism versus technocracy. There's never been another economic system in the history of the world that was defined to replace the status quo economic system, which has been one form of free enterprise or capitalism forever, throughout history. Technocracy is the only replacement economic system that's ever been designed. And today we have a war. The United Nations is swearing that they are going to implement it. They have a timetable, they have an intention, and they have the means to do it. And they are doing it. So, who is doing the transformation? Number one, I'm going to present to you the Trilateral Commission. Secondly, I'm going to present to you Technocracy, historic movement from the 1930s. Then I'm going to present to you the United Nations and their role. And lastly, we have all of the various hundreds, actually, of non-governmental organizations that are just that. They're not government, but they're not really private institutions either. They're agents of change. All of these work together at this point for a toxic brew that intends to transform the world into something brand new. It's never happened before, never been tried before. So let me define technocracy briefly for you. If you look at Webster's dictionary, you'd find that it meant government by technicians or management of society by technical experts. That's a good definition. You'll find plenty of places in world media where that term is used with a small t. But a large technocracy with a capital T is a different animal. It is a replacement economic system based on energy distribution and consumption and run by engineers, scientists, and technicians. If this is a new concept for you, it's going to give you a headache, so get your aspirin out. You might need it before we're done. Here's how technocracy was defined by the official magazine in 1938 called The Technocrat. They wrote, and this is a direct quote, "Technocracy is the science of social engineering, the scientific operation of the entire social mechanism to produce and distribute goods and services to the entire population," close quote. You can see the economic aspect of this immediately when it says to produce and distribute goods and services to the entire population. You can see the scientific aspect of this when they talk about the science of social engineering. You can also see their intention, that they intend to scientifically operate or control the entire social mechanism. Now, that means society, all of society. Social engineering is something that's been talked about for 150, 200 years. Nobody has successfully micromanaged and engineered society according to anybody's goal. We still have a modicum of freedom and liberty in this country, and you still have some freedom of choice in many other countries around the world today. Technocracy Incorporated as a movement originated at Columbia University in 1932. That was one of the thought leaders that day, Columbia University. It was founded by M. King Hubbert and Howard Scott in 1933. They created the Bible of technocracy that was called the Technocracy Study Course in 1934. I would encourage you to go to the internet and you can search for Technocracy Study Course. You can find a scanned version of it and you can read it yourself if you want to check some facts. M. King Hubbert was the guy who later in 1954 created the so-called peak oil theory. He is now hailed as a father of the ecological movement, that is the radical ecological movement. And no matter who you talk to today in the green world, or what organization or what different part of it, you will find friendly references to M. King Hubbert as being one of those people that is looked at as a father in the faith, so to speak. Now, just to give you some flavor of the early technocracy movement, this was not just an ideological movement at Columbia University. It morphed into a social movement, if you will, that had over 500,000 card-carrying members throughout the country and many more adherents who believed in it but didn't necessarily join. Here's a caravan of technocracy vehicles that was traveling from Phoenix, Arizona to San Francisco to have a big rally. You can see all the cars look the same. They're gray cars, red-orange hubcaps. You see a little trailer back there behind one of the cars, that travel trailer. You see loudspeakers on top of some of the cars. They use the loudspeakers to go down neighborhoods and streets and tell people to come to the meetings that they held in various cities throughout the country. Here's a rally point that I believe was in Phoenix before that rally. You can see all the cars a little more clearly now, and you can see on the door of the one at the lower left-hand side of the screen, the monad symbol, which was their corporate logo. And you can see all the cars look the same. Now, this color, the gray, was called Technocracy Gray. You could actually go to a car dealership and order a car in Technocracy Gray, and it would be delivered to you just like they look here. Many people did. Obviously, many people did. Here's a picture of Hollywood Bowl in Southern California. The Hollywood Bowl was pretty new back in those days, but here's a technocracy meeting that you can see packed it out. A guy handing out flyers in the back. You can see there's a lot of people there, not a lot of empty seats. And you can see down front the American flag. You can see right below it the technocracy flag with the symbol, the monad symbol, prominently displayed. Here's a closer photo, a blow-up of that. On the left, by the way, is Howard Scott, the co-founder of Technocracy Inc. An imposing figure, 6'6", very outspoken on technocracy. And on the right, you can see the close-up of the Hollywood Bowl, and Howard Scott is standing out front. He was a very distinctive-looking figure. You can also see they're all wearing these gray suits, double-breasted suits. They had hats like Howard Scott has on the left. And you can see the women also have matching skirts and, well, I guess you call that a suit as well. They got this gray motif from the director of operations of Technocracy Incorporated. And he was associated with an aircraft company, aeronautical engineer, and he had very close ties with some people in Germany in the aeronautics engineer. And this, of course, was during the time when Hitler was rising to power. And he felt that technocracy needed to have a paramilitary look. This was the look they adopted. It was a mistake, too, by the way, because many people identified technocracy with Nazi Germany. In Canada, for instance, technocracy was outlawed for 2 years during World War II. There was no direct connection that I could determine between this organization of technocracy and Nazi Germany, but nevertheless, the visual identification hurt them a lot. Some highlights of technocracy include, by nature, it produces volumes of inviolable regulations that are science-based. It creates totalitarian control in the end, but not socialism or communism. Yes, there are similarities, but they're not the same. It seeks to replace price-based economic systems with energy-based systems, that is, a system of energy credits. We'll talk more about this. Any good engineer that was going to start a project would make a list of requirements as to how that project could be achieved. These early technocrats were scientists and engineers, and they were very good at that. And they did write down in the technocracy study course 7 requirements that would be necessary for technocracy to work. Number 1 was this, quote, register on a continuous 24-hour per day basis the total net conversion of energy. Number 2, by means of the registration of energy converted and consumed, make possible a balanced load. Number 3, provide a continuous inventory of all production and consumption. Number 4, provide a specific registration of the type, kind, etc., of all goods and services, where produced and where used. And number 5, quote, provide specific registration of the consumption of each individual, plus a record and description of the individual. That was page 232 of the Technocracy Study course. And as I said, it's available on the internet in scanned version. You can download it and check it out yourself if you'd like to. The other 2 requirements were less innocuous than these, but nevertheless, they emphasized the economic nature of technocracy. It was not a political system. It was an economic system. We need to see it as that. Now, capitalism and free enterprise are based on national currencies. Yes, there's problems with national currencies, especially in today's modern world, because ever since currencies have been disassociated with gold back in the early 1970s, basically you have a world system of paper currencies with no backing whatsoever. They're merely created at will by the central banks and the governments of the world. Technocracy, on the other hand, is based on energy credits as currency. And this is what we need to focus on here for a while, at least, and then we're going to talk about the Trilateral Commission and its role in creating this. But technocracy is an alternative economic system. It's an otherworldly economic system, in my opinion, very difficult to get your head around. But nevertheless, it is a completely different system that's based on energy credits as its currency. And of course, any economic system must have a currency to operate. Well, here's what the early technocrats cooked up back in by this time this book was written, it was 1937. The book on the left is called Energy Certificate. You can find a scanned version of that on the internet as well. This gives all of the details on how the energy credit system would work. But on the right-hand side, you can see an early version in the Technate of America. It was called a distribution certificate. And the information that was contained at the bottom identified the person, it identified where he worked, it identified how old he was, and so on. The Technocracy Incorporated movement, that still is alive today, by the way, created the green energy card here, and they were a little more specific. They called it the energy acquisition card. But you can see it's essentially the same form. I want to make a distinction here between early technocracy and modern technocracy today. These early technocrats, even though they had the temporary backing of Columbia University in 1932, they never had any money donated to them from any global elite group like the Rockefellers, the Mellons, the Carnegies. They had no money. The only money they had to fund themselves was the dues they collected from members. That was another reason that the movement never really took off, because they didn't have that backing of institutional money. We'll see as we go along a little bit further here that when the Trilateral Commission picked technocracy up in 1973, it brought the massive amount of money along with it that were donated from the Rockefeller organizations, plus all of the organizations that surround that group. Here's a birthday cake. I just threw this in because it's kind of funny. This is a birthday cake for Howard Scott. You can see if it's clear enough for you, that they called him our director-in-chief, kind of a military term, I guess. But you can see it's pretty much a careful representation of what we saw in the picture just before this. But they viewed the energy certificate as the heart of technocracy. This was the coup d'etat for them. And it gives a little bit of explanation there. It says it is a medium of distribution. It is a continental accounting system. It is a guarantee of security. It is not, they said on the right-hand side, a medium of exchange. It's not a means of it's not a means of creating debt, and so on. They had roses around the outside of that. It was quite an elaborate cake. Fast forward 2012. I've been writing and talking about energy currency for probably 6 or 7 years now. And most people, when confronted with it, say, oh, come on, that's never going to happen. That's too different from what we have today. Well, back in 2012, in Split, Croatia, an energy currency conference took place. This is their flag or their banner, whatever. It was sponsored by the International Social Transformation Conference, the ISTC. They called the theme of this one, however, energy currency. And the subtitle is Energy as the Fundamental Measure of Price, Cost, and Value. This was an incredible conference that openly talked about creating an energy currency. And economists came from all around Europe and some from America. When I say economists, I'm talking about university professor types to talk about the merits of energy currency. Well, with my knowledge of historical technocracy, you might imagine this conference got my attention. It just hits the nail right on the head. So, okay, who were these people? Well, this is very interesting because looking into this wasn't just an oblique group of economists that were, nutcakes, if you will, kind of the radical fringe of the economic world that got together to discuss something that nobody is interested in. The picture of the man in this photo here, his name is Professor Ivo Slaus, and he's a member of the Club of Rome. He's also a member of the Board of Trustees of the World Academy of Art and Science, which is a fairly radical organization based in California. He's the chairman of the International Network of Centers for Sustainable Development. And this is a direct quote from their brochure, their website. He had become the keynote speaker for this conference, a member of the Club of Rome. Upon deeper investigation, I found out, in fact, that there were a number of members of the Club of Rome that attended this conference. They were very interested, apparently, in energy currency. And I'm not going to make this a talk about the Club of Rome. It is a global elite type of organization. Their original claim to fame was a book that was produced in 1972 called Limits to Growth. This is a hotly contested book still to this day. And if you want to have your hair curled, you can find this on the internet in scanned version as well. And I would encourage you to go read it because it's radical. This book is often credited today as being one of the most important books, early books, that suggested technocracy be implemented. And the policies and the ideas that they dealt with in this book were very spot on that day. I'm not endorsing this, by the way. Don't get me wrong. This was a heinous book as far as I'm concerned. But Limits to Growth was what started fame for the Club of Rome. So the energy conference that took place in 2002 that brought these people together to talk specifically about the implementation of energy currency, what it would look like, how it would be designed, how it would work, was basically not sponsored by necessarily, but it was surrounded by members of the Club of Rome. That tells me all I need to know about energy currency. It's not just a fringe economic concept. It's a core economic concept to the global elite. And my guess is it's coming soon. United Nations defines green economy. This is a quote from the UN Environmental Program, UNEP. A green economy implies the decoupling of resource use and environmental impacts from economic growth. These investments, both public and private, provide the mechanism for the reconfiguration of businesses, infrastructure, institutions, and for the adoption of sustainable consumption and production processes. You'll see how the United Nations fits into this as we go along. But the concept of green economy is virtually identical to early technocracy. If you consider what it means to decouple resource usage and environmental impacts from economic growth, it will give you a major headache. Because if you have a business yourself, if you're a small businessman, you'll know that resources are necessary to economic growth. If you make cabinets, for instance, and you can't get enough wood for your cabinets, you can't grow your business. You can't even keep your business in operation. And if you want to grow your business, make more cabinets, you need more lumber. You need more energy. Maybe you need more table saws, whatever. And then it talks about the reconfiguration of businesses. I have no problem with that. If you own a business and you want to reconfigure it, that's your problem, not mine. If you don't do it right, you'll go out of business. That's also your problem. But when they talk about reconfiguring infrastructure and institutions, this is a different story. Infrastructure is everything that we have that makes our economy work. It's the rail system. It's the highway system. It's the electrical system. It's all of the monetary system. And the institutions that moderate the infrastructure are things like governments and the various levels of government in different countries, the banking institutions, the administrative institutions, the legal institutions like courts and so on. They're talking about reconfiguring all of these. And why? Why would they do such a thing? Well, they would do it for the adoption of sustainable consumption and production processes. That's the point. It's an economic issue. Let's skip tracks now and talk about the Trilateral Commission and their role in bringing this to us today. The only politician that I ever heard that openly talked about the Trilateral Commission was Senator Barry Goldwater, who unsuccessfully ran for president in the 70s, but in 1979 wrote a book called With No Apologies. And he said, the Trilateral Commission is international and is intended to be the vehicle for multinational consolidation of the commercial and banking interests by seizing control of the political government of the United States. The Trilateral Commission represents a skillful, coordinated effort to seize control and consolidate the four centers of power: political, monetary, intellectual, and ecclesiastical. An incredible statement from a man who walked the Senate for some years and understood, and was honest about it, understood the mechanism of Washington, D.C. He called these people for what they were. The early days of the Trilateral Commission, it was co-founded in 1973 by David Rockefeller and Zbigniew Brzezinski. They had floated the idea at the 1972 Bilderberg meeting in Europe. They picked 289 members from 3 regions: North America, Europe, and Japan. That's where the word trilateral comes from. There were 97 members from the United States, transcending political parties. There were Democrats, Republicans, every other variety of politicians, but this was not a political organization at all. It transcended politics entirely. It included bankers, industrialists, academics, politicians, media, law firms, some NGOs. But a funny thing happened in 1976. This group hijacked the executive office of the United States, the executive branch. Jimmy Carter and Walter Mondale were both members of the Trilateral Commission. Later, Brzezinski wrote openly that he was proud that he picked Jimmy Carter as a presidential candidate to run for president. Brzezinski was immediately appointed to be the National Security Advisor. As you'll note, just as a side note, the National Security Advisor is the gatekeeper to the president. He's the one that stands closest to the president and filters all intelligence information that comes to the president. Then proceeded to appoint almost 1/3 of the U.S. Trilateral Commission members to top cabinet and administration posts. At one point, there was all but one cabinet member that was not a member of the Trilateral Commission. Incredible. The original Trilateral Commission policy, which was all over their documents back in those days, their papers that they wrote, they had a magazine called Trialogue, and they also published a series called Triangle Papers. We had all of them in our possession. They said they wanted to foster a new international economic order. Now that sounds suspicious back in 1973, a new international economic order. They said they wanted to promote interdependence amongst nations. They said they wanted to promote free trade by dismantling tariffs and tariff barriers. These were their stated goals. The book that set the course for all of this, by Zbigniew Brzezinski, was a 1970 book called Between Two Ages, the subtitle, America's Role in the Technocratic Era. We didn't understand at the time, Sutton and myself, that what technocratic era meant. I now know that it meant technocracy. We'll see. He said in Between Two Ages, Brzezinski, the nation state as the fundamental unit of man's organized life has ceased to be the principal creative force. International banks and multinational corporations are acting and planning in terms that are far in advance of the political concepts of the nation state. The question is, how did they use the executive branch to achieve their objectives? Well, consider this. The U.S. trade representative that creates and negotiates all of the crazy trade treaties that we've gotten ourselves into over the last 40 years, out of 12 USTRs appointed by the president, 9 of them have been members of the Trilateral Commission. Out of 12. Incredible. The president also appoints the World Bank president. There have been 8 since Carter took office. 6 of those have been members of the Trilateral Commission. Incredible. The executive office, starting with Carter and Mondale in 1976. Reagan was not a member. George H.W. Bush was. George H.W. Bush, of course, then became president himself in '89. Bill Clinton and Al Gore both were members of the Trilateral Commission. And when George W. Bush took office in 2000, his vice president, Dick Cheney, was a member of the Trilateral Commission. And Obama and Biden are not members, but we'll see in a minute that they're surrounded by members of the Trilateral Commission. So much so that they can't move left and right without their influence. National Security Advisors is another important position over the decades, and there have been 17 National Security Advisors since Brzezinski. 10 of those have been members of the Trilateral Commission. You'll notice on the right, General James Jones, Tom Donilon, and Susan Rice, all of those belong to Obama. There were 2 books that were written back in history. Aldous Huxley wrote Brave New World in 1932, same year that Columbia University housed the technocracy movement. He was looking at technocracy. If If you haven't read this book, I encourage you to go get it. You can buy a used copy of it for $3 or $4. Go buy it and read it. Orwell's book, 1984, was also looking at technocracy. If you haven't read that recently, get a copy and read it. They're different books from different perspectives, but they both give you a view of what scientific dictatorship looks like when implemented. Now, a virus has no contagion unless there are hosts who are able to carry it to other organisms who can be infected. This is what happened when the Trilateral Commission took their ideas of technocracy, adopted it as their new international economic order, and fed it lock, stock, and barrel to the United Nations, whose subtitle is We the Peoples, a Stronger UN for a Better World. The United Nations, in turn, passed it down through movements or through events like the Rio Earth Summit in 1992 that produced Agenda 21. It produced the 2030 Agenda just recently. It's produced a plethora of agencies that promote sustainable development throughout the world. In other words, technocracy ceased to be just a North American issue. It's now a global issue. So what are some current examples of the Trilateral Technocracy Action Plan today? Well, there's Agenda 21 to start out with. A plan to change the world, it says. Here's the timeline of events on how Agenda 21 came into being. In 1987, the Brundtland Commission was completed. It was the United Nations Commission, and they published a book called Our Common Future, chaired by Gro Harlem Brundtland. And Gro Brundtland was a member of the Trilateral Commission. The book, Our Common Future, reflected Trilateral Commission policy. She was from Europe, by the way. In 1992, the Earth Summit convened. It was called the UN Rio Conference on Environment and Development, and George H.W. Bush signed that document as a member of the Trilateral Commission. In 1993, just 9 months later, Clinton and Gore, both members of the commission, announced a national partnership for reinventing government. Just a little bit later, a month and a half later, the Agenda 21 book, pictured at the top there, the orange book, was published. If you don't have a copy of that book, go to Amazon and buy it. It's there, it's not a myth, it's a real book. A little bit later, another 2 months down the road, Clinton signed an executive order called the President's Council on Sustainable Development. See, they wasted no time to put it into practice. 3 months after that, Clinton signed another executive order called the National Performance Review of Reinventing Government. 1997, the U.S. Conference of Mayors created the Joint Center for Sustainable Communities. And in 2001, another NGO, the National Governors Association, endorses smart growth. This is how the Agenda 21 policies have come to America and the world as well. It was snuck in on the back of members of the Trilateral Commission, starting from the very beginning. Incredible chain of events. They brought us sustainable development. This is the official depiction of sustainable development. Community, environment, and economy merging together. Greener tomorrow than today. Continuous growth, they say. Self-sufficient, prosperous communities, they say. None of which has come to reality since they started it. You have global warming. presented by people like Al Gore, a member of the Trilateral Commission, who, of course, made the movie An Inconvenient Truth. And by the way, in the 10 and a half years since this thing was released, not one thing that Gore said would happen has happened. Not a single thing. Complete failure. We have cap and trade all over different countries and different states, the United States. You have Obamacare. And I say that Obamacare is not about your health, it's about your data, as we'll see. You have Common Core education standards. It's not about education, it's about your data. Well, it's about brainwashing as well. You have the Total Information Awareness, the Patriot Act, which is not about national security. It's about your data. This is a graphic that I lifted from a corporation that shows the consumer-centric view of the corporate world today. And that would be a technocratic view as well. You can see the little discs around the top. CSR strategy stands for corporate social responsibility, climate change going clockwise, health promotion, renewable energy, water footprint, biodiversity, enterprise risk management, sustainable buildings, sustainable constructions, cradle to cradle. You used to think it was cradle to grave. No, it's cradle to cradle now because thanks to the introduction of DNA technology, people are now predicting what offspring do and be like as well. This is all driven by economics. Total control over the economic process depends directly upon total information awareness within that economic system. And remember, this system was designed originally by scientists and engineers. It's being promoted by them today. This is why, by the way, that they need a currency system to support this new economic system. But nevertheless, total information awareness is key also to making technocracy viable. And now you should know why they need a total surveillance society. This has puzzled people greatly, but it's very important. Have at the center of this graphic, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. There are some 17 intelligence agencies in the United States, all of whom now answer to the Director of National Intelligence. It wasn't that way before 2005. They were independent. But today, the DNI is the intelligence czar of the country. A little history. The National Intelligence Agency was created by George Bush on April 21, 2005. This was in response to the Patriot Act. They said that they needed to get all of the intelligence agencies on the same page to share information so there wouldn't be any more screw-ups like there was when 9/11 took place. However, the first ever director of national intelligence was a gentleman by the name of John Negroponte, who just happened to be a member of the Trilateral Commission. Isn't that convenient? That means the person who first reassembled, re-engineered, and reworked the entire intelligence network in America was a member of the Trilateral Commission. He wasn't the only member of the Trilateral Commission who later became the Director of National Intelligence. Here's a look at Obama's intelligence trilaterals. Admiral Dennis Blair, who was appointed to be the DNI. Susan Rice, who's the current National Security Advisor. You remember Susan Rice was the lady that was ambassador to the United Nations when when the Benghazi affair took place, and she was the one that trotted out the story that Benghazi was all about stupid video in California nobody ever heard of before. She was very quickly, as she began to be investigated, very quickly was switched into being the NSA, which of course falls under executive privilege. They can't interview her anymore. Tom Donilon was deputy NSA for a while and then became the NSA. And then General James Jones has also served as an NSA. And ever since Obama set foot into the White House, he has never had one single day when he did not have, as his national security advisor, one member or another of the Trilateral Commission. Stunning. A few conclusions. Technocracy is very close to its endgame. It's old religion in one sense, but newly implemented by the Trilateral Commission as the green economy that will be supported by an energy currency. It is the primary sponsor of programs like Agenda 21, Sustainable Development, Smart Grid, Common Core Education Standards, biodiversity, wildland projects, and so on. And it will result in a scientific dictatorship, as in Brave New World, written by Huxley in 1932, and 1984, written by Orwell in 1948. Now, before I end here, I want to say one more thing about energy currency. As it was specified in 1934, energy currency was to be issued kind of like food stamps to all of the people in society in the social mechanism. And how they would receive was based on energy forecast that would be made by these scientists and engineers to determine how much energy would be produced in the next quarter, next month, or whatever period. That would be divided by the number of people in the population, and people would simply receive their energy scripts in the mail back then. And they would spend those energy scripts during the period prescribed. At the end of the period, the credits would expire. They had an automatic expiration date printed on the certificate. Then you would have to wait for your new allocation for the next period. So the takeaway here is that energy credits would be expendable and expiring so that there would be no ability to accumulate wealth. There would be no savings accounts. There would be no rollover of credits into the next period. Whatever you had simply would be dissipated and you'd receive a new allocation. There would be no inheritance because you'd have nothing to leave to your children. This was an incredibly radical proposition. Back in those days, the Technocracy Inc. membership strongly lobbied the newly elected President Roosevelt to declare himself dictator, to implement technocracy. Fortunately for us, Roosevelt didn't take him up on it. Many technocrats did enter into his government, but he never declared himself dictator. We can be thankful for that today. But the early technocrats, along with wanting him to be dictator, suggested that he simply dismiss Congress, send them home. You don't need them. You can be dictator yourself. We'll tell you what to do. We'll provide the science, in other words, on how to run society. But you, Mr. Politician, President, declare yourself dictators, and then we'll tell you what to do. It didn't happen back then, thank God. But it's on the verge of happening today. This, to me, is the clear and present danger for our future. It's not a political debate. It's not about Trump versus Clinton or Sanders or anybody else. The clear and present danger to the world today, indeed America and including the world, is technocracy. And that's why I call it the dark horse of the New World Order. Very few people in the world are studying and looking at technocracy as I've presented to you here today. I hope that within reach of this, either in the presence in the conference or somebody listening online, that there might be other researchers, economists, or whatever that would take up the challenge to investigate technocracy historically and see if the things I presented here are true or not. If they are true, we have an interesting future coming down the track. And I don't think anybody, my guess is, listening to this in this audience would be happy and willing to live under a scientific dictatorship that has no property rights, no ability to save, no ability to have freedom of choice. This is not the American way. This is not the way of anyone who values liberty and freedom around the world. You can go to technocracy.news, by the way, to purchase Technocracy Rising, and I wouldn't want to lull you into a false sense of security to think that listening to this talk gives you everything you need to know about technocracy. There's much more. You'll see the dots connected in my book. It very methodically provides the documentation as well as extensive bibliography where you can validate and verify the things for yourself, but you'll see all the dots connected in Technocracy Rising. And you can also find it, of course, on Amazon.com, and Amazon has a Kindle version. If you like electronic readers, have to go to Amazon, because that's where that's sold. And I encourage you to do so. And spread the word. Only people like you can make a difference to get the word out to other people about what's going on. This is not a topic that's picked up by the national media. It's a topic that sometimes the alternative media doesn't want to deal with, but it is important, and it is a clear and present danger. I think I'll wrap at this point and say thank you for listening. Thank you for your time. I'm sorry it was like drinking from a fire hose, but you can see now perhaps why I had to do it to you. But I hope you can take this information and make something good out of it. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Patrick Wood. Now, Patrick, thank you for your information. This really resonates with me on a level because I believe that if you can see an issue, if they present you an issue, that means it's the smoke screen in front of the real issue. So this kind of illuminates the real issue that's happening behind the scenes around the world and here in the US. So thank you very much for that information. So we're going to open this up for a few questions. If people have questions for now, if that's all right, Patrick.
Certainly.
So we can get that done now.
You bet.
Are there any questions that anybody has? If they want to relay them to me, come on up and tell me the questions, and I'll relay them to Patrick Wood here. Come on up, guys.
How does the Council on Foreign Relations relate to all this Trilateral?
How does the Council on Foreign Relations relate to the Trilateral Commission and the information you presented us today?
The Council on Foreign Relations is an important source of policy documents that have been desired by the Trilateral Commission over the years. But the CFR does not dominate the Trilateral Commission. It's the other way around. Over 40% of the board members of the CFR are members of the Trilateral Commission, as well as the president of the CFR, Richard Haas. He's a member of the Trilateral Commission as well. And remember, both organizations have deep roots in the Rockefeller family, so it's not surprising that there would be some symbiotic relationship between the two, but it's pretty clear that the Trilateral Commission sits on top of the Council on Foreign Relations.
Thank you. Next question.
My next question might be a little more of a general nature, but it basically, your recommendations for what we can do, other than the obvious of trying to A, become informed ourselves, and B, share that information with others. When every major candidate of political office is either directly influenced or otherwise a member of these organizations, how do we begin to turn the tide toward our benefit, that of trying to save our country, if you will, or for the average individual?
Absolutely. Great question. I personally believe that Americans need to take after their own local communities at this point, because Agenda 21 and 2030 Agenda has trickled down into every community in America today. And there are wannabe technocrats in every community in America. And people need to get involved with their local school boards, water boards, supervisor boards, anywhere that public officials have influence over society. And when you run across somebody who's exhibiting this mindset, or who says, oh, sustainable development is a wonderful thing, you need to step up and challenge them and say, no, it's not a wonderful thing. And if we lose our free enterprise system in America, we will lose everything, you realize, because even as Donald Trump says, we're going to make America great again, I would only point out, the only thing that's made America great for the last 250 years is its economic system. It has allowed us the ability to grow an economic prosperity that never has been seen in the history of the world. So clean up from the bottom up and send a message up the food chain. When you're done with your local community, you're coming for them up there as well.
Thank you very much. Next question.
Yeah, I have a question. I'd like to know whether or not, what do you think Israel's role will be in playing with this whole technocratic society? The reason being is because you put up the books that you had up there and everything. My dad and I have had probably about 90% of those books in our possession now. We followed this whole thing. And so my question again is, what's Israel's role, and probably how Donald Trump, because he is a deal maker, what he will be in his ability, and what Trilateral Commission will allow them to do with them. And I think your talk was absolutely superb.
Thank you, sir. Well, let's address Israel first. Israel is kind of a special nation, of course, in the world, because it's at the center of the Arab world. It's greatly under siege in many ways. On the other hand, Israel is just one country in a global community, all of which have been sold out to sustainable development. And at this point, Israeli policy, governmental policy, is very much in tune and in line with sustainable development in the United Nations program. So they're playing into it at this point, just like America's playing into it. But also, I would point out that all of the Arab world the Islamic world, rather, is also buying into technocracy or sustainable development. And we find that the Islamic world is one of the greatest supporters today of sustainable development in their world, and for everybody for that matter, but they're working in close cooperation with the United Nations to bring it to fruit. So, what will Trump do? Will he somehow set this back in history, or whatever, destroy it? I guess we'll wait to see. It looks like he's got a good chance of being the next president, but I would point out that he just recently met with Henry Kissinger. I wasn't too happy with that, because Henry Kissinger is one of those original members of the Trilateral Commission. And Henry's a kingmaker. He's, in every way, he's a kingmaker in the world of the Trilateral Commission. So we'll see. what Trump does. I don't like the prospects of either Trump or Hillary at this point. I'm not sure we have a real choice again, if you will.
Thank you, Patrick. We have one more question.
Yes, Patrick. I'm aware that you are aware of the transhumanist agenda that is also lurking on the background. Can you give what's at the core of the transhumanist agenda and how that ties into technocracy and the energy currency?
That's a great question. Great question. How does transhumanism tie into technocracy? Well, we talked about transformation of the world when we started out here. The world is being transformed. The economic system is being transformed. Governments are being reinvented to accommodate the new economic system. And at the same time, we have a parallel movement that's transforming humans themselves. And it's called the transhuman movement or the transhumanist movement. And the transhuman movement it believes that technology and science can be applied to the condition of mankind to bring about ultimately immortality, omniscience, omnipresence, and other qualities that are typically reserved only for our definition of God. Will they achieve this is not the issue right now, but how they're connected is that both technocracy and transhumanism are based on a philosophy called scientism. I didn't talk about scientism today, just didn't have enough time. But scientism is worth studying to see how they tie together. But essentially, technocracy and transhumanism are joined at the hip as Siamese twins. One is concerned with transforming the world economically. The other is concerned with transforming humans to populate this new world that they envision. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that answer, Patrick. That's an issue that I find really terrifying in the world today, is the transhumanism. I see the evolution of the human species needs to happen from the mind and the heart, not from technology and outside influences. So I really resonate with that answer. Are there any more questions? All right. Thank you very much, Patrick Wood. We appreciate all your information, and we have a lot to think about here.
My pleasure, sir. Thank you all.